I was standing in the dark of a bridal dressing room when I heard my wife laugh about replacing me. Not divorcing me, not separating, replacing me. The words drifted through the thin wall like smoke. After tomorrow night, everything transfers. He won't even understand what he's signing. Another voice, male, calm, clinical, answered, "The cognitive review will justify it. Once the paperwork is executed, control shifts immediately." Then my wife again. 30 years of marriage in that voice. 30 years of shared mortgages, funerals, graduations, quiet Sunday mornings. "He won't see it coming," she said softly. "He trusts me." And in that small dark space with the smell of perfume and pressed satin around me, I realized something I had never considered in 3 decades of loving her. Trust can be weaponized. The anniversary party was supposed to be simple. 30 years of marriage, 200 guests, our children flying in from opposite coasts, a string quartet in the backyard, champagne from Napa, speeches about endurance, loyalty, and building something that lasts. I drove to Whitmore's boutique that afternoon to pick up Eleanor's dress, a deep navy gown she had chosen, with the careful pride of a woman who still cared how her husband looked at her. The sun was warm. I remember thinking how lucky I was that we had made it this far. Whitmore's had been in town for 40 years. Sharon, the owner, had fitted Eleanor's dress herself. When I stepped inside, the place was quiet except for the low hum of overhead lights and the faint scent of steamed fabric. "David," Sharon said, her voice thinner than usual. "You're early." I figured I'd surprise her. Make sure everything's perfect. She didn't smile. Instead, she walked around the counter, took my elbow not roughly but firmly, and said in a whisper, "Come with me. Right now." I laughed, thinking maybe Eleanor was here, and Sharon wanted to stage some sort of playful reveal. But Sharon didn't laugh. She led me past the racks of silk and lace and pushed open the door to a dressing room. "Stay here," she whispered. "Don't say a word. Trust me." "Sharon, what is this about?" She shook her head, already stepping away. "You need to hear this yourself." The door closed, the light clicked off. I stood there surrounded by mirrors and fabric, feeling foolish and slightly annoyed. Then I heard the bell over the shop door. Eleanor's voice followed. Clear, familiar, warm. "Is it ready?" she asked. "Yes," Sharon replied too brightly. "Back by the fitting area." Footsteps approached. Another set followed. A man's voice, one I recognized vaguely from a recent dinner. Dr. Marcus Hale. A neurologist Eleanor had insisted I see after what she called that little episode 6 months ago. It had been nothing more than a brief dizzy spell at a board meeting. Stress, the ER doctor had said. Dehydration. But Eleanor had pressed for follow-ups, memory tests, evaluations. "You understand," Dr. Hale said now, his tone businesslike, "that once the cognitive review is filed, we can move forward legally." My heart began to pound. Eleanor exhaled slowly. "I know, I need it done cleanly." "And the power of attorney amendment?" he asked. "That's drafted. He'll sign it tomorrow night. I'll tell him it's just contingency planning, after the party when he's relaxed." A third voice joined them, younger, smooth. "I've already prepared the transfer documents," he said. "Once control shifts, we can restructure the assets before he realizes what's happening." I knew that voice. Ethan Mercer. Financial consultant, 15 years younger than me. Introduced to us last year as someone who could modernize Carter Holdings. Eleanor's laugh drifted through the wall. "He won't realize. He still thinks this is about simplifying things." "And the assisted living placement?" Ethan asked. There was a pause. My lungs felt tight. "We won't need it immediately," Eleanor said carefully. "But once the evaluation labels him impaired, it'll be easier. Gradual, respectable. The children will understand if the doctors recommend it." The room seemed to tilt. Impaired. Assisted living? Control shifts. 30 years of marriage echoed in my ears. "I'm not doing this to hurt him," Eleanor said quietly. "He's been slipping. He forgets things. He zones out. The board has noticed." "That's why this needs to be swift," Dr. Hale replied. "For everyone's protection. For everyone's protection." I pressed my back against the wall of that dressing room and felt something inside me fracture. Yes, I had mislaid my car keys twice last month. Yes, I had reread a paragraph in a report because my mind drifted. But I still ran a company with 200 employees. I still negotiated contracts. I still remember the day Eleanor walked down the aisle in a cream silk dress that caught the light. "He won't see it coming." Her words came back to me like a slap. And then the final blow. Ethan's voice lowered. After tomorrow, you won't have to pretend anymore. Eleanor didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. I'm tired of pretending, she said. Footsteps moved, fabric rustled. I heard the zipper of her dress. I just want peace, she added. Peace. Through replacement. Through erasure. They spoke for another few minutes about timelines, about signatures, about how best to frame things to our children. I stood there in darkness, my reflection multiplied infinitely in the mirror behind me. Each reflection asking the same question. How long? How long had this been unfolding while I believed we were planning a celebration? The bell over the shop door rang again as they left. Silence returned. A moment later, the dressing room door opened and light flooded in. Sharon stood there, eyes wet. I'm sorry, she whispered. I stepped out slowly, my legs unsteady. How long have you known? I asked. She swallowed. I overheard them last week. They've been coming in together. I didn't want to believe it. Neither did I. I looked at the garment bag hanging on the rack. Eleanor's anniversary dress. Perfectly pressed. Ready for a celebration. Did she say anything about me? I asked. Sharon hesitated. She said you trust her. I let out a breath that felt like it came from somewhere deep in my chest. 30 years. 2 children. A shared life built from nothing. And tomorrow night, in front of everyone we love, she intended to quietly take control of everything I had worked for, and possibly my autonomy along with it. I picked up the garment bag. Thank you, I said to Sharon, though. I wasn't sure what I was thanking her for. As I walked out into the late afternoon sun, the world looked exactly the same. Cars passed, people laughed on the sidewalk. Somewhere someone was mowing a lawn. But inside me, something fundamental had shifted. Tomorrow night wasn't going to be an anniversary. It was going to be an execution. And if Eleanor wanted a performance, I would give her one. I drove home with Eleanor's dress hanging in the back seat like evidence. The late afternoon light filtered through the windshield, warm and deceptively gentle. For a few miles, I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. Then something colder settled inside me. Not panic, not rage. Calculation. If I walked through the front door and confronted her, she would deny everything. Dr. Hale would produce clinical language. Ethan would frame it as prudent planning, and I would become the unstable one. No, I had heard enough to know this would require patience. By the time I turned into our driveway, I had arranged my face into something neutral. Almost tired, nothing more. The house sat where it had always sat, overlooking the lake we had chosen together 30 years ago, when we were young enough to believe we would live forever. Eleanor loved that view, said the water made her feel calm. When I stepped inside, I could hear music from the kitchen. Ella Fitzgerald, Eleanor's favorite. She was standing at the island reviewing a stack of place cards for the anniversary dinner. You're back early, she said, smiling without looking up. I wanted to make sure the dress was ready. She turned, then brushing a strand of silver-streaked hair from her face. She had aged beautifully, gracefully. The kind of woman who still commanded attention in a room without raising her voice. Is it perfect, she asked. It's perfect. I watched her closely for some flicker of guilt, some hesitation. There was none. She crossed the room and kissed my cheek. Her lips were warm, familiar. We made it, David, she said softly. 30 years. 30 years. I know, I replied. She returned to the place cards. I added Dr. Hale to the guest list. He's done so much for us this year. Of course he had. That's thoughtful, I said evenly. She studied me, then tilting her head slightly. Are you feeling okay? The question would have once felt caring. Now it sounded diagnostic. I'm fine, I said. You seem distracted this morning. Just thinking about tomorrow. She nodded, satisfied. I went upstairs to my office and closed the door. 30 years of trust. The words echoed in my mind. We had met in Chicago in 1993. I was 28, working 2 jobs while trying to build a software consulting firm out of my apartment. She was working in marketing for a regional firm. We met at a mutual friend's dinner party. She laughed at something I said about floppy disks, and I remember thinking I had never wanted to impress someone so badly. We married 2 years later in a small church. No orchestra, no catered event, just folding chairs and borrowed flowers. We built Carter Holdings together. She handled client relationships. I built infrastructure. We survived the dot-com crash. We refinanced our house during the recession. We put both our children through college without loans. When our daughter broke her arm at 9, Eleanor slept in a hospital chair for 3 nights straight. When my father died, she held me while I cried in the kitchen like a child. There had been fights, of course there had. Money, parenting, my long hours, her frustration with my stubbornness. But betrayal, that had never entered the equation. 6 months ago, during a quarterly board meeting, I had paused mid-sentence while reviewing projections. The numbers blurred for a moment. My head felt light. I finished the presentation. Later that evening, I told Eleanor I'd felt dizzy. She insisted on taking me to the ER. The doctors found nothing alarming. Stress, they said. But Eleanor pressed. She scheduled an appointment with Dr. Marcus Hale. He's one of the best neurologists in the state, she had said. It's just precaution. Precaution turned into cognitive assessments, memory recall tests, brain scans. You forgot where you put your phone last week, she'd reminded me gently. You called our neighbor by the wrong name. I had laughed it off. Now replaying it, the pattern looked different. The narrative had been forming quietly. David is slipping. David needs oversight. David should consider transitioning responsibilities. I opened my laptop and began reviewing the last 6 months of company records. Ethan Mercer had been introduced 9 months ago at a charity gala. 38, polished, Ivy League. He specialized in legacy planning and asset restructuring for aging founders. He had flattered me. You've built something remarkable, Mr. Carter. It deserves to outlive you. Outlive me. He had gradually inserted himself into financial discussions, proposed offshore holding structures for tax efficiency, recommended updates to the trust. Eleanor had supported every suggestion. You don't want to burden the kids, she had said. Simplify things. My cursor hovered over the trust amendment draft Ethan had emailed last month. At the time, I had skimmed it. Now I read every line. Buried in the language was a clause allowing temporary transfer of operational control in the event of documented cognitive impairment. And who would document that impairment? Dr. Hale. My stomach tightened. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Eleanor stepped into the office without waiting for permission. You've been in here a while, she said lightly. Everything okay? I turned slowly in my chair. Just going over some numbers. She walked behind me and placed her hands on my shoulders. You don't have to carry everything alone anymore, she said. You've done enough. The tone was soothing, reassuring, and suddenly suffocating. I'm not dead yet, I replied, forcing a smile. She laughed, but it was a half-second too delayed. Of course you're not, she said. Don't be dramatic. Dramatic. Was I finally seeing clearly? She squeezed my shoulders once more before leaving the room. When the door clicked shut, I exhaled slowly. I replayed the boutique conversation in my mind. After tomorrow night, everything transfers. He won't even understand what he's signing. The assisted living placement. A life gently managed into a corner. Not through violence. Through paperwork. Through concern. Through love. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a small leather notebook I hadn't used in years. On the first page, I wrote, "What do they think I don't see?" Underneath that, I listed names. Marcus Hale, Ethan Mercer, Trust Amendment, Cognitive Review, Offshore Restructuring. Then I wrote something else. Find proof. Because instinct wasn't enough. Emotion wasn't enough. If I wanted to survive what was coming, I needed evidence. 30 years of trust had built my life. But tomorrow night, that trust would be tested. And if Eleanor believed I was fading, she was about to discover how wrong she was. The morning after the boutique, I did something I never imagined I would do in my own marriage. I hired someone to follow my wife. The decision came without drama, no pacing, no whiskey at dawn, just clarity. If Eleanor was building a case to erase me, I would build one to protect myself. I drove 2 towns over to an office park that looked like every other office park in America. Low brick buildings, trimmed hedges, a flagpole that creaked in the wind. The name on the directory read, Robert Klein, Investigative Services. Robert had spent 22 years with the FBI before retiring early. We'd met once at a charity fundraiser. He'd struck me as the kind of man who noticed exits before sitting down. When I stepped into his office, he stood to shake my hand. Mid-60s, silver crew cut, eyes that assessed before reacting. Mr. Carter, he said, didn't expect to see you here. I didn't expect to be here, I replied. He waited. I need discretion, I said, and speed. He closed the blinds before I finished the next sentence. I told him everything. The dressing room, the voices, the words cognitive review power of attorney-assisted living. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he leaned back slowly. Do you have proof, he asked. Not yet. Then we gather it. He explained the process calmly, methodically. Phone metadata, financial tracing, surveillance, background checks. People planning something this structured leave trails, he said. They always think they're cleaner than they are. Can you move quickly? How quickly do you need? The anniversary party is tomorrow night. His eyebrow lifted slightly. Then we start now. By afternoon, Robert had 2 associates assigned. One focused on Eleanor's communications. The other began reviewing corporate filings tied to Ethan Mercer. I returned home and behaved exactly as I had for 30 years. I asked about the caterer. I tasted wine. I confirmed the seating chart. But inside, something sharp had replaced the easy rhythm of married life. That evening, Eleanor suggested we review a few documents before tomorrow gets hectic. We sat at the kitchen island under the warm glow of pendant lights. She slid a thin folder toward me. It's just housekeeping, she said. Ethan thinks we should streamline authority structures in case something ever happens. I opened it slowly. Power of attorney amendment. Transfer of operational authority. Contingent cognitive certification. The language was dense, but the outcome was simple. If Dr. Hale documented cognitive impairment, even temporary, Eleanor would gain immediate control of all company operations and discretionary financial authority. My name would remain on paper. My influence would not. You've been under so much stress, she continued gently. This protects you. Protects. That's thoughtful, I said evenly. I know it's hard for you to talk about aging, she added, but we have to be realistic. Realistic. I signed nothing. I'd like to have my attorney glance at this, I said. A flicker crossed her face, small, quick. Of course, she replied too quickly. I just thought it would be easier before the party. Easier for whom? That night I lay beside her in bed listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing. 30 years of shared sleep. And I had never felt more alone. By noon the next day, Robert called. I have something, he said. I stepped outside to take the call. Ethan Mercer formed an LLC 3 months ago, Robert continued. Blue Meridian Holdings. That means nothing by itself. It does when your trust amendment references Blue Meridian as a restructuring vehicle. Silence stretched between us. Who's listed as managing partner, I asked. Eleanor Carter and Ethan Mercer. The lake shimmered in front of me. Children rode bikes on the sidewalk across the street. Normal life continued. What else? Dr. Hale received a consulting fee from Blue Meridian 2 weeks ago. $50,000. The air left my lungs slowly. Consulting for what? Robert paused. Medical documentation services. There it was. The price of my impairment. I need everything in writing, I said. You'll have it. And Robert? Yes, sir. Dig deeper into Mercer. He was quiet for a moment. I already am. By 4 o'clock, Robert emailed a preliminary report. Ethan Mercer had previously worked for a financial advisory firm investigated for securities irregularities. No charges had stuck, but the pattern was there. Aggressive asset reallocation. Offshore movement. Client opacity. Blue Meridian had an account in the Cayman Islands. 2 authorized signatories. Eleanor Carter. Ethan Mercer. I printed the documents and locked them in my desk. Then I went downstairs to help arrange flowers. Guests would begin arriving in less than 24 hours. Eleanor stood in the living room directing a rental crew. She looked radiant, confident, calm. I studied her from across the room. Was this fear, greed, desperation, or something else entirely? She caught me watching. What, she asked lightly. Just thinking how lucky I am, I replied. She smiled. If you keep saying that, people will think you're sentimental in your old age. Old age. I smiled back. If she believed I was fading, she was about to witness the most focused version of me she had ever known. That evening, Robert sent a final update before the party. We have documentation of planned asset transfers scheduled for 9:30 p.m. tomorrow night, he said over the phone. That's during the toast, I replied quietly. Yes, electronic authorization. You would only need to sign the trust amendment physically. The rest triggers automatically. Once I'm declared impaired. Yes. And if I refuse, Then they'll attempt to frame refusal as proof of instability. The elegance of it was almost impressive. "You'll be there tomorrow?" I asked. "In the crowd," Robert said, "with everything." I hung up and stood alone in my office. On the desk lay 30 years of photographs. Our wedding day, the birth of our children, family vacations, company holiday parties. Had she been planning this for months? Or had it grown slowly from fear? Fear of losing control. Fear of watching me age. Fear of vulnerability. I didn't know. But I knew one thing with certainty. Tomorrow night would not end the way she expected. If she intended to quietly erase me, I would force the truth into the light. The morning of the anniversary party arrived bright and deceptively peaceful. Sunlight spilled across the lake, turning the water into fractured glass. The house smelled of fresh-cut hydrangeas and catered hors d'oeuvres, warming in stainless steel trays. From the outside, nothing suggested collapse. Inside, I had never felt more alert. Eleanor was already dressed in a silk robe when I came downstairs. Her hair was pinned loosely, makeup half finished, her anniversary gown hanging in a garment bag near the staircase like a silent accomplice. "You're up early," she said, glancing at me through the mirror in the hallway. "Couldn't sleep," I replied. "Nerves." "Maybe." She smiled. "It's just a party, David. Just a party." I poured coffee and watched her move through the kitchen with the effortless authority she had always carried. For 30 years, I had admired that strength. I had relied on it. Now I studied it. At 9:15 a.m., my phone buzzed. A single message from Robert. "All documentation secured. Electronic transfer scheduled 9:32 p.m. Dr. Hale confirmed attendance. Mercer arrived in town last night." I deleted the message immediately. "Is everything under control?" Eleanor asked casually. "Always," I said. By early afternoon, the backyard had transformed. White linen tables stretched across the lawn. Lanterns hung from the oak trees. A stage had been assembled near the water for speeches. Staff moved efficiently between the house and the bar tent. Our daughter Claire arrived first. She stepped out of her rental car and ran toward Eleanor with open arms. 30 years, she laughed. "You two are indestructible." Indestructible. I hugged her tightly. She smelled like the same lavender shampoo she'd used in college. "You look tired, Dad," she said quietly when Eleanor turned away. "Big week. You sure you're okay?" I met her eyes. "I'm fine. I would not drag our children into suspicion without proof. Not yet." By 4 o'clock, guests began arriving in waves. Colleagues from Carter Holdings, old neighbors, friends from church, investors. Each handshake felt surreal. 30 years, David. That's rare these days. You've built something remarkable. Your marriage is an example. Example. Eleanor moved through the crowd like a seasoned diplomat. Her laughter rang out naturally. If guilt existed, it wore no visible mask. At 6 p.m., Dr. Marcus Hale arrived. He approached with measured warmth. "David," he said, gripping my hand firmly, "you look strong." "Feeling stronger every day," I replied evenly. He held my gaze a moment too long. "Good," he said. "That's good." Ethan Mercer followed shortly after. Navy suit, polished smile, perfectly composed. "Mr. Carter," he said smoothly. "What a milestone." "Indeed," I replied. His eyes flicked briefly toward Eleanor across the lawn. A look passed between them, subtle, efficient. Robert stood near the bar tent, blending into a group of guests discussing golf. He gave no signal. None was needed. Everything was in place. As twilight settled, the string quartet began playing softly. Candles flickered across the lawn. The mood shifted into something warm and reflective. Dinner concluded around 8:45 p.m. At 9 o'clock, Eleanor squeezed my hand. "Time for your speech," she whispered. My speech. I stood slowly and stepped onto the small stage near the lake. The microphone hummed faintly as I adjusted it. 200 faces turned toward me. For a moment, I saw nothing but decades. Birthdays, business launches, vacations, arguments resolved in quiet kitchens. I cleared my throat. 30 years ago, I began. Eleanor and I stood in a small church with folding chairs and borrowed flowers. Light laughter rippled through the crowd. We had no idea what we were building. A company, a family, a life. I glanced at Eleanor. She smiled, eyes shining. For 30 years, I believed in one thing above all else. I paused deliberately. Trust. The word hung in the air. Trust is what allows two people to build something larger than themselves. It's what allows a business to grow, a family to thrive. Guests nodded. I continued calmly. But trust requires clarity. Eleanor's smile flickered almost imperceptibly. And tonight, before we raise our glasses, there are a few documents I'd like to clarify. A murmur moved through the crowd. I stepped down from the stage and gestured toward the large screen that had been set up for a slideshow of family photos. Robert I said casually. The screen flickered to life. Instead of wedding pictures, a scanned document appeared. Blue Meridian Holdings, Articles of Formation. A few guests leaned forward. 3 months ago, I said evenly, my wife and our financial advisor formed a new holding company, Blue Meridian. Ethan shifted subtly in his seat. Eleanor's hand tightened around her champagne glass. This company was structured to receive control of Carter Holdings upon the documentation of my cognitive impairment. Gasps spread across the lawn. Eleanor stood abruptly. David, this isn't appropriate. I raised a hand gently. Let me finish. Another document appeared. Consulting fee, Dr. Marcus Hale, $50,000. The crowd went silent. A payment I continued for medical documentation services. Dr. Hale's face drained of color. You're misrepresenting, he began. I am presenting records, I replied calmly. The next slide displayed email correspondence between Ethan and Eleanor discussing the timing of the electronic transfer scheduled for 9:32 p.m. The timestamp glowed on the screen. 9:32 p.m. It was 9:27. I looked at Eleanor directly. Would you like to explain why control of my company is set to transfer in 5 minutes? Her lips parted, but no words came. Ethan stepped forward. This is standard estate planning, he said sharply. You're confused. Am I asked quietly. The final slide appeared. The assisted living pre-admission form. My name typed neatly at the top. Silence swallowed the lawn. Claire covered her mouth. Our son Matthew stood frozen beside the oak tree. Eleanor's voice broke. You were forgetting things, she said desperately. You scared me. Scared you enough to erase me, I asked. The clock on the screen turned 9:31. I pulled a folded document from my jacket. This, I said, holding it up, is a temporary injunction filed this afternoon. The transfer is frozen. 9:32 p.m. Nothing happened. Ethan glanced at his phone. His composure fractured. Dr. Hale stepped backward. Eleanor looked at me not with anger, but with something closer to shock. You hired someone, she whispered. Yes, I said. For the first time all evening, my voice trembled, not with weakness, but with the weight of 30 years collapsing at once. You told them I wouldn't see it coming. I let the silence stretch. But I did. The string quartet had stopped playing. The lake behind us lay perfectly still. I won't sign anything tonight, I said quietly, and I won't be placed anywhere against my will. I turned back toward the crowd. I'm sorry you had to witness this, but clarity matters. Then I stepped down from the stage. Eleanor stood motionless in her navy gown surrounded by 200 stunned guests. 30 years of image shattered in under 10 minutes. And for the first time in months, I felt completely awake. For a few seconds after I stepped down from the stage, no one moved. The only sound was the soft lapping of water against the dock. Then the murmurs began. Low at first, disbelieving, chairs scraping against stone, glasses clinking as people shifted. Eleanor stood perfectly still beneath the lantern light. Her navy gown shimmered gently in the breeze, and for a strange, disorienting moment, she looked exactly like the woman I had married, poised, elegant, unshakable. But her eyes were different. Not soft, not steady. Calculating. David, she said carefully, her voice controlled. You've misunderstood what this was. Have I asked quietly. Ethan stepped forward first. He recovered faster than she did. This is a private family matter, he announced to the crowd. There's no reason to escalate it in front of everyone. Escalate, I repeated calmly. You scheduled an asset transfer for 9:32 p.m. A few guests checked their watches instinctively. Ethan's jaw tightened. You're proving our concerns right now. The tactic was almost admirable. Reframe me as unstable, impulsive, paranoid. Dr. Hale cleared his throat and approached with practiced sympathy. David, cognitive stress can distort perception, he began gently. We only recommended precautionary planning. Did you recommend a pre-admission assisted living agreement as well, I asked. Gasps rippled again through the guests. Dr. Hale's composure cracked. That document was exploratory. It was signed, I said, by you. Silence again. Claire stepped toward her mother. Mom, is this true? She asked, voice trembling. Eleanor's gaze flicked toward her daughter. I was trying to protect him, she said. You've all seen it. The forgetfulness, the distraction. Matthew stepped forward now. Dad still runs the company, he said sharply. He closed a $12 million deal last month. Ethan interjected quickly. High-functioning impairment is common. Enough, I said firmly. I walked back toward the stage and picked up the microphone again, not because I needed amplification, but because it forced stillness. I am not impaired, I said evenly. But even if I were, that decision would not belong to a secret LLC. My eyes moved across the crowd slowly. I built Carter Holdings from a folding table in our first apartment. Eleanor was beside me every step of the way. I paused. That's why this hurts. The vulnerability in my voice shifted the atmosphere. This wasn't rage, it wasn't spectacle. It was betrayal laid bare. Eleanor's shoulders sagged slightly. You were slipping, she insisted quietly. You forgot Claire's birthday dinner. I mixed up the date, I replied, by one day. You left the stove on. For 3 minutes. You scared me, she said louder now. You scared me because I watched my father disappear into dementia. I watched my mother lose everything because he refused to plan. The crowd shifted again. There it was. Fear. Raw and unfiltered. For a moment, the anger inside me faltered. I would have planned with you, I said softly. You didn't need to ambush me. Ethan stepped in once more, voice sharper now. Let's be practical. Even if you stop tonight's transfer, this doesn't go away. The board has concerns. I smiled faintly. I met with the board this afternoon. His expression changed. I presented them with documentation of Blue Meridian and your Cayman accounts. A ripple of whispers spread through the investors in attendance. You, Ethan began. They voted unanimously to suspend any restructuring tied to your firm, I continued, effective immediately. His confidence finally cracked. You had no right. I had every right, I replied calmly. It's my company. Dr. Hale attempted one last recovery. This is emotionally charged. Perhaps we should reconvene privately. We will, I said, with attorneys. Eleanor looked at me then, not as an adversary, not as a co-conspirator, but as someone who had miscalculated. I never meant to humiliate you, she whispered. You humiliated me the moment you said I wouldn't see it coming. Her eyes glistened. David, for a fraction of a second, I saw the young woman from that church in 1993, the one who believed in partnership, in struggle, in building something together. And then I remembered the dressing room. After tomorrow night, everything transfers. I lowered the microphone. I'm not pressing charges tonight, I said quietly. But this ends now. I turned toward Robert, who nodded once from the edge of the crowd. Copies of all documentation have been filed with legal counsel, I added. Any further attempt to declare me impaired without independent evaluation will be considered fraud. The word landed heavily. Fraud. Eleanor closed her eyes. Guests began quietly gathering their things. Conversations splintered into hushed speculation. The anniversary cake sat untouched on its silver stand. 30 years represented in white frosting and navy ribbon. Claire approached me slowly. Dad, she said, voice shaking, why didn't you tell us? I needed proof, I answered. Matthew stood beside her, jaw tight. You're not going anywhere, he said firmly. No, I replied. Across the lawn, Ethan was already on his phone pacing. Dr. Hale slipped away quietly. Eleanor remained where she stood. The lanterns flickered above her, casting shifting shadows across her face. I walked toward her slowly. We stood close enough to feel each other's breath. Why didn't you talk to me, I asked. Her voice was small now. Because you would have said no. Yes, I said. And I was afraid. Of what? Asked it one on. Of losing control. There it was again. Control. Not love. Not safety. Control. The string quartet members packed their instruments silently. Caterers cleared plates. The lake reflected the moon in fractured pieces. I won't sign anything, I said gently, and I won't disappear quietly. She nodded faintly. I know, she whispered. I stepped back. I loved you enough to trust you, I added. You should have loved me enough to speak to me. The distance between us felt wider than the lake. 30 years ended not with shouting, but with understanding. And sometimes that's worse. The guests left in fragments. Clusters of whispered conversations drifted toward the driveway. Car doors shut softly as if the night itself required gentleness. No one raised their voice. No one lingered for cake. The lawn that had been dressed for celebration now looked like the aftermath of a quiet storm. Lanterns still swayed above empty chairs. The anniversary banner fluttered against the oak tree reading 30 years of love in gold script that felt almost ironic now. I stood near the water long after most of the guests had gone. Behind me, I could hear Eleanor speaking in low tones to Claire. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to see it to know that our children were asking questions that would not have easy answers. Robert approached quietly. "Transfer blocked," he said under his breath. "Bank confirmed the freeze." "Good. Your legal counsel has the documentation. If they attempt anything further, you're covered." "Thank you." He studied me carefully. "You're holding up better than most would." "I don't feel better," I said. He nodded once. "That's normal." Normal. Nothing about the last 24 hours felt normal. When the last rental van pulled away and the staff finished clearing tables, the house felt cavernous. Claire and Matthew remained. We gathered in the kitchen, the same room where Eleanor and I had once debated paint colors in school districts and business loans. Now it was a tribunal. Mom, Claire said carefully, "Did you really plan to move Dad into assisted living?" Eleanor sat at the island, still in her navy gown makeup, smudged faintly at the corners of her eyes. "I was trying to protect him," she said again, but the conviction had drained from her voice. "From what?" Matthew asked sharply. "From himself." Eleanor turned toward him. "You didn't see what I saw. The forgetfulness, the distraction." "I saw stress," I said quietly. She looked at me, then not defensive, just tired. "You didn't watch your father deteriorate," she said softly. "You didn't hold his hand while he forgot your name." There it was again. Fear masquerading as foresight. "And so you decided to skip the conversation entirely?" I asked. "If I asked you, you would have refused." "Because I am not impaired." She inhaled sharply. "Maybe not yet." The words landed harder than anything else she'd said that night. Matthew shook his head in disbelief. "This isn't about medical fear," he said. "It's about control." Silence followed. Eleanor didn't deny it. Claire's voice trembled. "Mom, were you and Ethan?" "No," Eleanor said quickly. Too quickly. Robert had warned me about that reaction. "There's documentation of financial entanglement," I said calmly, "and consulting fees." Her jaw tightened. "Ethan offered solutions," she replied. "You were resistant to change. You wouldn't modernize the company. So you modernized me instead." Claire covered her mouth again. "The cruelty of it was not in violence. It was in process. Paperwork. Clauses. Gradual displacement. I never meant to hurt you," Eleanor whispered. "But you did." Matthew stepped forward, voice firm. "Dad's getting a full independent evaluation," he said, "from someone not on Blue Meridian's payroll." "I agree," I replied immediately. Eleanor flinched slightly. "I'm not afraid of transparency," I added. "Are you?" Her silence answered. The next morning the house felt hollow. Claire and Matthew had left before sunrise, both promising to return within the week. Eleanor and I sat at opposite ends of the breakfast table. No music played. No place cards waited to be arranged. "Where do we go from here?" she asked finally. "Attorneys," I said. Her eyes closed briefly. I was trying to prepare for the inevitable. The inevitable. "You aging." "I am aging," I said calmly. "So are you." She gave a humorless smile. "I thought I could manage it." "Manage it. Not walk through it together. Manage it." "I will not be managed," I said quietly. She nodded. "I see that now." "Do you?" I wondered. By noon, my attorney arrived. By 3, divorce paperwork had been drafted, not filed, but prepared. Not out of vengeance. Out of protection. Robert's team continued tracing Blue Meridian's transactions. Preliminary findings suggested more aggressive financial structuring than Eleanor likely understood. Ethan's prior firm was already under quiet review by regulators. Dr. Hale, when confronted with documentation, requested counsel immediately. The collapse was not explosive. It was structural. A slow dismantling of carefully arranged deception. That evening, Eleanor packed a suitcase. Not dramatically. Not angrily. Methodically. "I'll stay at Claire's for a while," she said. I watched her move through the bedroom we had shared for 30 years. Each folded garment felt like a closing chapter. "Were you going to tell me?" I asked quietly. She paused. "I thought you'd thank me one day." "For erasing me. For protecting the legacy." "Our legacy was built on partnership," I said, "not containment." She zipped the suitcase. At the doorway, she hesitated. I loved you, she said. Did you? Her eyes filled. I still do. I didn't respond. Love that bypasses consent is not love. It is strategy. She left just after sunset. The lake reflected orange light as her car disappeared down the driveway. I stood alone in the silence that followed. 30 years of shared decisions reduced to a series of legal conversations. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt something quieter. Awake. The collapse had not destroyed me. It had revealed the fault lines I had ignored. And sometimes revelation is the only way forward. A year has a way of rearranging everything. Not dramatically, not all at once, but quietly through paperwork, through empty spaces at the dinner table, through mornings when you wake up and reach across the bed only to find cool sheets. It has been 12 months since the anniversary night. 12 months since lanterns flickered over a celebration that became an exposure. The lake is still here. The house is still standing. Carter Holdings is still operating. But nothing is the same. The independent neurological evaluation came back 3 weeks after Eleanor moved out. Comprehensive, unbiased, administered by a specialist with no financial entanglements. The results were clear. No cognitive impairment. No early dementia. Mild stress-related fatigue. Normal aging. When I read the report, I didn't feel victorious. I felt relieved and oddly saddened, because it meant this had never been about my mind. It had been about fear and control. The divorce finalized 8 months after the party. There were no screaming courtroom scenes, no dramatic accusations, just attorneys, mediators, and signatures. Eleanor did not contest the documentation once Robert's findings were formally presented. Blue Meridian Holdings dissolved under regulatory scrutiny. Ethan Mercer quietly relocated out of state after his advisory license was suspended pending investigation. Dr. Hale resigned from his hospital board position and settled a malpractice complaint without admitting fault. Consequences like truth tend to surface eventually. Eleanor and I divided assets fairly. I insisted on that. I refused to let the ending turn vindictive. 30 years deserved at least that much dignity. Claire and Matthew visit often now. At first, their conversations were cautious. They tiptoed around the topic of their mother, around the word betrayal, around the concept of aging. But time softens edges. One evening last fall, Matthew stood by the lake with me as the sun dipped below the water. You scared me that night, he admitted. Because of the speech. Because I realized how quickly things can shift. I thought you two were unbreakable. So did I. He nodded. I'm glad you didn't just explode. You handled it. Handled it. I've thought about that word often. I didn't handle it because I'm strong. I handled it because panic would have completed their narrative. If I had raged, they would have labeled it instability. If I had wept publicly, they would have cited emotional fragility. Calm was my only defense. Claire asked me recently if I would ever forgive her mother. I don't know, I told her honestly. Forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. Eleanor wrote to me once. A handwritten letter. No legal language, no strategy. She admitted she had been terrified watching her father decline years ago. She admitted she began interpreting every small mistake I made as confirmation of history repeating itself. I thought if I moved first, I could control the outcome, she wrote. Control. The word returns like a refrain. She ended the letter with a line that stayed with me. I forgot that partnership requires conversation, not management. I have not responded. Not because I hate her. Not because I want her to suffer. But because I am still understanding what remains. What remains is this. I am not diminished. I am not fragile. I am not something to be quietly transitioned into irrelevance. Aging does not mean surrendering autonomy. Love does not mean forfeiting agency. And fear, no matter how well-intentioned, does not justify deception. There are evenings now when I sit on the dock alone with a glass of wine. The house behind me is quieter. The routines are simpler. I cook smaller meals. I leave lights off in rooms no one uses. But I also breathe differently. More deliberately. There is clarity in knowing you were nearly erased and that you stepped back into your own outline before it happened. I sometimes replay the dressing room moment in my mind. He won't see it coming. I almost didn't. That realization humbles me. Trust is a beautiful thing. But blind trust can become a vulnerability. If there is one lesson I carry forward, it is this. Partnership requires transparency. Silence breeds assumptions. Assumptions breed control. And control left unchecked can masquerade as care. I don't know what Eleanor's future looks like. I don't know whether time will reshape our relationship into something gentler, friendship perhaps, or at least civility. What I know is that the illusion we built could not survive secrecy. And sometimes losing an illusion saves your life. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt quietly sidelined, quietly managed, quietly dismissed, I want you to pause. Ask questions. Seek clarity. Calm is not weakness. Documentation is not paranoia. And advocating for yourself is not selfish. I would never have chosen to end 30 years this way. But I would choose every time to remain present in my own life. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever faced a moment where trust cracked and you had to decide who you really were, I want to know. Leave a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what you would have done. Tell me whether you believe fear can justify control. We share stories like this every day, not to create division, but to create awareness. So if you want to continue this journey with me, subscribe. Stay with us. There are more conversations ahead, more truths to uncover, more quiet awakenings to explore. Because none of us should fade quietly into someone else's plan. Not at 30, not at 60, not ever.